Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with our latest gameplay and exhibition video to show you. In this series, we highlight a random deck on MTG Arena, and it can range from a spicy homebrew to a tier 1 meta deck that's hot on ranked. And if you do like these videos and anything I do, all I ask for you is to give a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you can enjoy everything from my gameplay, deck techs, booster pack openings, and so much more. If you do like the deck, I will leave a link in the details below so you can give it a spin on Arena for yourself. Keep in mind that these videos will be pure gameplay, no commentary style, so you can enjoy the game, and if you want to, you can see my final thoughts on this deck at the end of the match. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And there we go, everybody. That is our Under the Sea deck, aka Merfolk Tribal in the Explorer format. A big difference, of course, from our historic cheap version that we played about, what is it now, 2 years ago? Oh, good lord. Time does fly. But in any case, here's our thoughts on this after we playing this. What we've learned from playing the deck is being able to at least have one extra lord now in Voldarian Hexcatcher is going to make a huge difference for powering up Merfolk, since many of the other lords are only available in Historic. Otherwise, to help out Merfolk Mistbinder, Voldarian Hexcatcher is a major upgrade. It's a little easier to cast, and this Merfolk Wizard at 1/1 has also Flash, so you can bring it in at the end of your opponent's turn as a tempo play, or as a combat trick if you are swinging with your Merfolk. Same thing also, the big thing that makes this deck a lot more viable now is the ability that it has on it where you can sacrifice a Merfolk to counter a target non-creature spell unless this controller pays 1 is actually a pretty powerful ability. Don't underestimate the fact that even if they pay 1, it can go one of two ways. You can force your opponent to tap themselves out, so that way you can then utilize another card, or you can just sack a Merfolk just to counter their spell if they've already tapped out, which either way puts you at a major advantage. However, the only downside, of course, is you will be having to sacrifice a bit of your board, so you're going to have to utilize some of your 1-drops, which again may not seem like a big deal, but sometimes that one sacrifice can also still swing it in your opponent's favor. So be careful of when it's important to sack and when it's important to just take the damage or the loss in a creature. Otherwise, you want to, of course, still rely on Collected Company, and unlike our Soldier Tribal deck, Collected Company in this deck is a lot easier to cast because we're only running 2 colors. And on top of that, Merfolk, splashing for green here, does give us a little bit of a much easier synergy versus a 3-color human soldier deck. Otherwise, if you do want to try to utilize something a little bit more budget, such as Secluded Courtyard, you can also put in your Unclaimed Territories, but be very careful with that because, again, with cards such as Collected Company, you want to make sure you have the correct mana available to utilize this card, or say your 1-drop in Spell Pierce. Otherwise, most of the Merfolk deck is pretty much what we've seen before in many other iterations. We'll just go over it real quick. Merfolk Wind Robber in the 1-drop slot and the Chimera Speaker. These are great in the early game. This will pump itself up once you get another Merfolk out. The Wind Robber, it mills our opponent. It's not really something we care about doing. I only put it in the deck because it has flying, so it's an early evasive creature that can get itself pumped up very quickly with our lords. In the 2-drop slot is where most of the meat of the deck is, with our River Sneaks. Solid still card, great to get in some easy damage since it can't be blocked. Silver Gill Adept, always an all-star card, gets us to draw a card as long as we reveal a Merfolk, and it doesn't really matter because we want to just run out our hand as soon as possible. A couple of Merfolk Tricksters for some turning off our opponent's creatures and their abilities, so just use these sparingly and make sure they count. Mistbinder's your other lord. Deep-Root Waters may seem a little clunky in the deck because, again, most of the deck is focusing on aggro, but the Deep-Root Waters in the main deck allows us to at least push ourselves a little further and make sure that we can then go super wide if we have to gum up the board versus our opponent. This Deep-Root Waters, whenever it triggers off, however, also synergizes very well with River Sneak, so keep that synergy in mind. Glasspool Mimic gives us a little bit of extra lands when we need to in a pinch, but otherwise we want to try to see if we can then convert over these into extra lords. Otherwise, your other 2 cards are going to be the Kopala Warden Waves and a single copy of Chimera Tyrant of Vraska. These 2 legendary creatures are going to be utilizing different things. With Kopala, it's going to be here mostly for defensive purposes to protect our Merfolk with its abilities, and Chimera is just a catch-all which can allow us to either draw a card with our Merfolk, we can then pump up our Merfolk very slowly, or it can then go in for damage without being blocked. We only want one of each because, again, we are relying on Collected Company to make sure we can get those copies out and make sure we're not clunky with our casting. Otherwise, the lands are pretty much going to be every kind of dual land you can grab. If I have to be really specific, if you want to prioritize your dual lands for this, as always, get your shock lands first, get then the pathway lands. Now that we get the pain lands, get the pain lands third. As far as the Innistrad lands, these ones I would say get last. If you really have them already, that's fine to use them, but if you have a full playset of the pain lands and the pathway lands, get those priority first. One copy each of Otawara Soaring City, Boseiju, Who Endures, always awesome all-star cards if you need them in a pinch, and of course at least 1 forest and 1 island for this. You can always go budget. I'm going to emphasize that one more time, so don't feel like you have to do this. It's just going to be a little bit easier for you to cast what you need on time. As far as your sideboard is concerned, we have some UC Guard Approach. These are mostly just to either tap down a big creature that we can't get through with our Merfolk, or we can put Hexproof on one of our creatures to protect it. Ether Gust for the tempo play versus other red and green decks. A single Disdainful Stroke for any decks that are trying to go big very quickly. 2 Negates as your more catch-all counterspell. Mystical Disputes for the blue decks out there. Masked Vandals or Shapeshifter that technically counts as a Merfolk, but being able to exile an artifact or enchantment, which is really, really nice. If we need to protect against wraths, some heroic interventions, and because we don't want to go off tempo, copies of Tormod's Crypt cost us absolutely nothing, which can then exile an opponent's graveyard at a moment's notice. But otherwise, that's basically going to be it for the deck. This deck is pretty straightforward, as you kind of saw. You want to ideally play everything on curve, so that way you can get out your 1-drop, your 2-drop, your 3-drop, going right into Collecting Company, and just smash your opponent as fast as possible. But of course, the biggest weakness of the deck goes if your opponent has a lot of spot removal. If they have wraths, then we will fall apart. So be mindful of that. However, the reason why I wanted to do this, of course, is even though those things do affect us, that Voldarian Hexcatcher alone is what can make or break our victory or defeat. So you want to make sure, if nothing else, prioritize protecting this card, so that way you can then utilize your other creatures if you have to sack to protect basically your game plan and ensure that you can get to victory. But otherwise, you tell me in the comments below, what do you think? Are you a fan of Merfolk decks out there? Do you like tribal decks in particular? I'm sorry if it's going to be a little bit more to do, but I do have a couple more tribal decks because I got to check out the other lords and see what other fun shenanigans we could do with the other ones that we haven't touched on yet. So I really hope you guys stick around with me to check those out. But otherwise, I would still say, even though we are missing some of the lords from the historic version of Merfolk, give this deck a try and explore, and I will assure you, you will not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later.